Welcome to Justice Talks. This is the podcast where we use trauma responsive practices to inform criminal justice reform. My name is Dr. Lori Hall, and today I'm joined by two guests. If y'all want to introduce yourselves.
Yes, I'm Claytis Bilali. I'm a PhD student and a trauma psychotherapist.
And I'm Evelyn Harrison. I am a criminology student.
Awesome. So today we're going to be continuing our conversation about trauma, and we're talking about the impact of trauma in early childhood, specifically how significant that early childhood experiences are for individuals as they go through the developing process into adulthood, how that might differ slightly from trauma that you might experience as an adult. And so when I think about trauma in childhood, I'm really thinking about this thing that we call adverse childhood experiences, right? And so these are the things that we would consider outside of normal childhood experience. And you can name all of them: abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, the death of a parent, significant tragedy, or natural disasters. Like anything that happens in early childhood really affects us in very, very significant ways across the life course. So when you think of like early childhood trauma, can you think of any other ideas of what that might look like that can be things that can be traumatic that I didn't necessarily say?
Parental abandonment.
Yeah. So like either it could be that they left them with grandparents or they left them all together. I know about that one, but or maybe they were imprisoned, right? Incarcerated. So yeah, that's huge.
Yep.
Or just being an absent parent. Even if, and I think that affects children even if they never even knew the parent.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I don't know. I was trying to think about other.
Yeah. A couple of clients that I've had have gone through like this process that we call adultification, where technically like their parents are in their lives, but the child starts taking on the role of the parent or the adult.
So like in cases of addiction or alcohol abuse.
Yes, got to take care of mom and dad, make sure mom and dad.
Or significant illness.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I've worked with some clients that have been the older siblings, right? And they have multiple siblings and they're the older siblings. And so they will start to take care of those kids, including themselves, including the parents. Got to make sure mom and dad, don't overdose. Got to make sure that there's enough food in the house. And it's so interesting to me that, right, like I think sometimes when we think about ACEs, right, adverse childhood experiences, I think we sometimes almost tend to hyper-focus on the abuse, right? Like we tend to go to the worst case scenario of like the physical, like the most intrusive, the most that leads to some tangible outcome. But the neglect, I think, is overlooked often, right?
Yeah.
Like the idea that parents don't, care enough to bring food in the house, for example, or parents that don't really have a care in the world related to whether they're using substances in front of their kids or not.
Yeah.
So you get these really complicated relationships between parents and kids. And I think some clients that I've worked with almost don't recognize that neglect as abuse.
Just the way that it is.
Yes, because it's so sneaky, right? Like technically they didn't hit me, but we struggled to have food in the house. Like, but we struggled, like nobody came to my recital, right? Like it was just me and my siblings all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that process of adultification has always been very, very interesting to me.
Yeah. And when I reflect back on my own experiences, for me, the one thing from early childhood experiences that has the most impact on my every single day life now is the neglect.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a whole lot bound up in neglect, more than just like, oh, my parents didn't provide enough food or they, like we didn't go to the doctor or whatever.
Right.
Like there is a lot more, there's abandonment, there's rejection, there is loss of like comfort and adoration. Like there's so much that's bound up in that. And it's so crucial, I think, that certain things are taking place in the development of a child that contribute to their ability to organize themselves so that self-organization becomes disrupted,
Yeah.
right? And so then a whole host of problems occur as an adult because they don't even know who they are,
Yeah.
right? They don't even have like this self-concept
Yeah.
developed, right? Positive nor negative, right? Like it's just, and one thing that I've struggled with a lot as an adult across my life, really, it's like I feel like a child perpetually,
Mm.
right? So like I even recognizing like I am an adult,
Mhm.
I am of adult years, I do adult things, right?
Of adult years. I
Yeah.
love that.
I still very much feel like a child
Yeah.
a lot of the times in a lot of situations. And there are some situations where I feel less
Mm-hmm.
like a child. But it's really about like that organization of who I am. It's almost like you're stopped there
Mm-hmm.
and your organization couldn't develop further past that. And so for me, like neglect was one of the most significant things. But you mentioned adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, right? So this comes from the study that was done by Kaiser Permanente, Folletti, and somebody,
Mhm.
I can't remember, back in like what, the 70s?
Yeah.
I think it was the 70s. And it was like the most expansive study on the relationship between adverse childhood experience and public or physical health,
Mhm.
right? And so they were really able to look at the connection between how our early childhood experiences influences our adult health, right? And then from that, we've learned a whole host of things about mental health and
Right.
things like that, right? So, it's not just, that we're struggling with mental health, right? It also impacts us on a physical health level, right? So individuals have higher higher rates of high blood pressure and heart disease and inflammatory diseases and I think it was diabetes and obesity. There's also increased risks for substance use and alcoholism. Like it's just there's so much connected between the body, right? That we're learning, and so it's like multifaceted.
Yeah.
I think. But today, like I just want us to focus kind of on like how it affects us in terms of our mental health, right? And even in our relationships. And so when we think about like early childhood trauma, like I think that I hear a lot of people that are like, oh, like it's not happening anymore. Just get over it.
Yeah.
And like, as we discussed before, like it leaves a lasting imprint. Right. And for me, like, I don't know that I'll ever get to a place where like I don't talk about trauma. Right.
It's a part of who you are.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just, it's part of your identity in many ways. I mean, do you think it's part, like it comprises your whole identity, or do you feel like there's other parts to me beyond this thing that has happened to me or these things that have happened to me?
Oh, there's definitely parts of me that are beyond that. Like, I have things that I enjoy, things that I do, the interests that I have that don't relate or well, now that I'm saying that, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I love cooking and I love baking, but for me, it's like a nurturing thing and it's giving back to me. Like, I think about it in a way of like it's filling my soul in ways that I didn't get when I was a child. But when I'm doing it, I'm not thinking about like trauma.
Yeah.
I'm just like enjoying the nurturing, right? And then to eat good food. Right now, like I, like have sustenance and like I'm not struggling for that. So like that part is, I don't know, like that's weird because like maybe it is, but not directly. Like I think the things that I'm doing or the things that I enjoy are undoing some of the pain that I have experienced. But indirectly, maybe. I don't know.
No, that makes sense. Do you think the most important relationships that a person has is their relationship to their parents or their caregivers?
Not at all. I
Interesting.
think that the most important relationship that an individual has is the relationship that they have with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's foundational.
I think that definitely I feel like that takes most people the majority of their life to realize, though, because like I would think maybe a couple years ago, like mine was with my siblings because that's who I had, right? Like it doesn't necessarily have to be with the authority figure because that's who's probably like messing with you the most, but like along the same lines of how you were saying, like how you feel like a child most of your life, like I've felt like an adult for my whole life. So like, and when someone speaks to me as if I'm a child, it's like, who are you talking to? But I think maybe that's subjective in a way.
Yeah.
Because that's different to, I guess, everybody's experience, possibly.
Yeah, because I think like a lot of developmental psychologists would say yes, it's the most critical, important, the most important relationship. And that's really where we get things like attachment theory, right? The idea that like your relationship to your parents will not only determine like the type of like child you are, but will also determine the types of relationships you have with people in the future. But I've always found it so interesting because when I ask a lot of my clients who have been through trauma, they often answer like how you do. They will say things like, no, I don't think it's the most important. Like it would have been great if I had parents that cared and were there for me and parented, but I didn't, and I'm still okay. Like I'm still learning to be okay, but I turned out okay, like as best as I could given the circumstances. And so I think your response just fascinates me that you're like the most important relationship is the relationship that you have with yourself.
Yeah.
But no, I keep thinking back to attachment theory. I'm like, you would have so many developmental psychologists just screaming like, what do you mean? It's like the most important relation is that with your caregivers. I mean, it's certainly influential, but I don't know, especially also in criminology when we talk about like social bonding theory, right? Like the idea that, you know, you have to be like attached to those caregivers and those, you know, in particular your caregivers, or that will determine like whether you become delinquent or not.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too. And like, if I reflect back on it, like, I don't think that I have ever like had an attachment to anyone really. Like, bye.
Yeah.
I have learned how to be like self-sufficient, and I don't necessarily mean like in a financial way, but like, for example, like whenever I am struggling with emotion, right? I need you to leave me alone, and I am going internally, and I am working through this, and I'll come out on the other side. It might take me a couple of days, but I'll be back. But no, I don't want to hug. I love it. Like people are like, you want to hug? Why? What is that going to do for me? Like, it does not make me feel better. It does not solve my problems. I'm confused. And they're like, do you want to talk about it? And I'm like, so I can tell you my inner thoughts. No, thank you. And I probably don't even like you right now. You know?
Your preference is to isolate more so than
yeah.
to reach
And so
out.
like, and I just remember like, I remember when I was in foster care being alone a lot. And I think that that's kind of where it stems from. Like I was isolated, and like, and another thing that you have to think about too is like, I lived before I was removed by the state. I lived in town in the city. And then I was placed with a home in an extremely rural area. And like, there were no cars driving down the road.
Oh, wow.
Right. And like, it was just like a very different world. And so like, I was completely isolated. Like, you didn't see people, but, yeah, like I have to go through like, kind of like that process. Like, so the relationship that I have with myself, to me, is like the most important. And I hear people sometimes like, even they're like, so like I cut my dad off, you know, like years. And they're like, but that's your dad. And I'm like, I can cut toxic people off. It does not matter if that's your dad or your brother or your uncle or whatever. And that's hard for a lot of people. And when I tell people that, they're like, like, that's your dad.
Yeah.
That's your mom. And
It's
I'm like,
but if you knew the things,
yeah,
Yeah.
like,
you wouldn't want them either.
right.
Yeah.
You know, like, or I don't have a relationship with my siblings. And they're like, and like for you, that would be kind of like bizarre.
Well, I think it would be bizarre for me just because the way in which I was raised was that I have an older brother, and then it's me, my twin, and my little sister. And my twin, my brother, he is very much my younger brother. So it was me and my older brother as like the parents for them. So it would be bizarre because it's like we raised them.
Right.
But
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, yeah, but for me, you know, like I would be like, you know, like I'm cutting them off.
Yeah.
Right. And I have that experience a lot. Like, you know, like if you're going to be toxic or you're going to cross my boundaries, like I don't need you in my life. Like I'm, you know, so like I haven't really experienced like this bond other than like I would say with my husband and my kids.
Right. That was going to be my
Like-
next question is
like
how
that-
that translates in your future relationships.
But they're still at a distance.
Interesting.
You know, like there are a lot of like that internal process that's still very much me. And like, I don't even speak about it. Like I just come out on the other side of it and I learned something to do differently, right? That doesn't involve me having to control you at all, right? Like I've just reworked the way I'm functioning or the system that I have. But like, you know, like those are the people that I would say like I have a huge bond with. But it's still at a distance. You know, like you talked in a previous episode about boundaries.
Yeah.
Right. How high are those boundaries? And you gave an analogy and I was like, well, that's
Some-
not me.
Some people build them very high
You
and
know,
it
like-
works for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I get a lot of times that like people that don't know me think that I am someone that I am actually not. Right. Because like from a distance, like I think we had somebody told me like, oh, I would think you were much harsher or much harder. Right. And that's just the wall. Right. And I'm like, you know, like, don't approach me. Like, I'm going to put up the iron fence and like, you stay over there. And like, only when do we, you know, like, does something happen that allows me to pull that down? Do you get to like see, right? But I don't know. Like, I think that.
I don't know. I think a lot of times though, because you're very much too like okay with cutting people off, this, that, and the third. I think that there's a lot of times where when you're in a situation where you have to kind of like play caregiver in a sense, it's a lot harder to do that with your parental figure because, at least for me anyway, that like anything that I did affect them negatively. So like if I cut them off, it affects them. If I do something like right, then positively, like stuff like that. So I feel like there's probably a lot of other small children in that situation where they're like trying to play both sides. And it's not as easy for them to be like, okay, I can just leave. So
Yeah, I definitely think that it's probably difficult for other people. And I think that our situations, like you are like an older, right, sibling, and I was the youngest,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that, my oldest sister experienced adultification. So when you mention like attachment, I know that I did not get attached to my parents. I was actually told throughout my life, like when I would fall, I did not run to either one of my parents, even if they were sitting right there. I ran to my oldest sister
Interesting.
for comfort, right? And she was like, you know, almost 10 years older than me. And she was very much like the parent, even though like we, you know, like I have no memories. Like I don't know. This is things that people told me. But I think that has something to do also with like my response, right? Because like that didn't happen. Like my dad wasn't even, well, no, he was around, I guess, whenever I was born, but I don't know to what degree really. That kind of idea of like attachment. Like attachment theory and attunement. Attunement is extremely important too. So like how in tune are the parental figure and the child? What do they understand the needs and then respond to the needs of the child, right? And I don't think that my parents were able to do that at all.
Yeah.
Like, even to this day, like when I think about, like my mom and who she is not aware of anybody else in the world. Like, you're like, I broke my leg. And she's like, you know what? Let me tell you what happened to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's been interesting, but like thinking about trauma that people experience in childhood, it's something that you don't just get over.
Yeah.
Right. And it leaves lasting imprints like throughout the life course, and it affects you in very, very different ways than the traumatic things that occur as adults, right? Because as adults, we have more skills.
Yep.
Right. We have a toolkit that we can, access. We have different supports that we've intentionally built, right? As children, like we've said, like you're kind of powerless. You have what you have, and there's no like cut them off, right? You can't just be like, oh, I don't like my parents anymore. I would like new ones,
Well,
like.
but I think that's what you see with like juveniles that decide to run away. Because I've witnessed a lot, and you've probably too with what you work with, but just like seeing it on like call screens and whatnot of so many juveniles and having to create bolos for juveniles that have ran away because of their situation, that people just think they're bad kids when it's reality. Like you look at their history and it's just a long line of abuse.
Yeah.
And it's just very unfortunate.
Yeah, that should definitely be like a huge flag. I don't know, like if a child runs away,
it's not just because they feel like it.
Yeah, then there's generally it's an abuse. I think most cases it's sexual abuse that they're running away from, but other types as well too. It's interesting that we haven't kind of like learned like, hey, maybe we do need to find this kid, but we need to figure out what's going on in this home.
Let's not just bring them right back to the place that they're trying to run away from.
In childhood, early childhood trauma is significant, and it affects individuals across the life course, and it takes a lot of work to combat and to meet the needs of these individuals.
There's a bright light at the end of the tunnel, though. I think a lot of people who don't know about trauma, have never been through it, I think it's easy to kind of fall into this trap of thinking like, oh my God, will you ever be okay? Are you always going to be like this? And of course, it's always kind of a battle. It's a journey. That journey is not linear. But, I think with treatment, proper social supports, a lot of these things can't be undone, but you can change and take back a lot of the control, that, made you feel powerless when you were younger, and all these things that, ideally you would have had, but you didn't for whatever reason. I think one of my favorite like treatment modalities is dialectical behavioral therapy. And one of the aspects of that therapy is radical acceptance. So really exploring and processing what happened to you, but at the same time saying like, I accept what happened. I don't approve of what happened, but I accept that this horrible thing happened to me, and this is how it's impacted me. Now, what am I going to do about that? But there's, again, a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a work in progress.
For sure. And I want to also add to that, you mentioned, like people outside saying, are you ever going to be, not talk about this? Are you ever going to be like over this? Right. For individuals who've experienced trauma, they want nothing more than to stop talking about it. They just want to be through it. Right. And the thing that I think that also is important to understand is when survivors are talking about it, they're engaging in healing. For many, 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 many years, I did not talk about trauma. I did not talk about my experiences. I masked and I went about my life as if I was perfectly normal and nothing had happened to me. And I tried to exist like that. Right.
Mhm.
There are still things to this day that I cannot even speak about because I'm not at the place where I'm ready to unpack that.
Mhm.
So if you hear a survivor talking about their experiences, support them
Mhm.
because they're trying to work through healing. And it is a part of the integration process where they're trying to make sense of what happened
Mhm.
and successfully integrate that into their long-term storage so they can move on, right?
Mhm.
And any statements and conversations of like, are you ever going to stop talking about this? Are you ever going to be done? Is only going to hinder their
Mhm.
progress. But if they're talking about it, they're working towards healing.
Absolutely.
So, well, thank y'all for joining me. This is Justice Talks. This is the podcast where we talk about trauma responsive practices and criminal justice reform.